let's make a test in your second language. Quickly say, in your second language, your telephone number to the person sitting next to you. How many of you had to remember it in your first language and then translate it? If you did, then you just dipped into your common underlying proficiency. You went back into your first language and moved your knowledge to your second language. This is what bilingual learners do constantly. They move back to their point of reference and cross it over to their second language. As another example, let's say we have a new student from Korea who has just joined the English-speaking school. He enters his 8th grade social studies and he hears the word democracy repeated several times. He can't make heads or tails of that string of sound. Luckily, he sits next to another Korean student and asks what that word is. He's told the equivalent word in Korean. All of a sudden, the knowledge he has built concerning democracy shifts into his conscious, his working memory. He can then understand much more of the lesson, especially if the teacher uses visual support and modeling to make her meaning clearer. Now, let's try another experiment with you. This time it will be in Korean as well, but it will be unintelligible to you unless you know Korean and can read it. Now, assuming that you can't, and those of you Korean speakers out there, I'm going to ask you to be patient with me. So let's assume that you cannot. I'm going to ask you to look at the following symbols, and I'm going to make a bet with you that in less than 30 seconds, you'll know what it says. You ready? Here we go. I bet some of you are already starting to get a clue about what it says. But if you're not, I'm going to move to the next slide. Maybe you're going to be getting an understanding of what this is. But if not, here's another clue. Okay, so let's go ahead and have you tell the person sitting next to you, if there's someone next to you, what you think this might be. Chances are most of you have thought that these are the days of the week. And in Korea, the week can start with Sunday. So here we would have Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. So what tipped you off? Obviously, it was the fact that I laid over a calendar for you. And in this case, I guess you can figure out that this is February in a leap year. So what you did, again, is that you used what you knew in your first language and transferred it to your second language. Again, you used what you already knew and made sense of it, used it to make sense of the new language. So what we want to do then is capitalize on this skill that human beings tend to do quite naturally as they associate the old with the new. So this is what is meant by teaching for transfer. Get your students to use what they already know in their first language and link that prior knowledge to the new knowledge. And you can start with things that you can say to your students like, what experiences have you had with, for example, democracy? Okay, and then you can start warming them up on that so that the words they already know, be it in their first or their second language, start to warm up, and that prepares them to get to know the new information. As teachers, it is our role then to help our students transfer by identifying what they already know, and then helping them by building a bridge to the unknown, to the new learning. Another way you can teach for transfer is by using graphic organizers, as you saw with the Korean example. You can use a graphic organizer of a calendar, for example, to transfer the information. A Venn diagram, you can use bar graphs or tally marks or a line plot or a timeline. You can use other kinds of graphic organizers that are built in one language and transferred to the next language. You can do it in first and then transfer to the second language, or go from the first language and transfer to the second language. You can also use the same graphic organizers between subject areas. So let's say your students are used to seeing the Venn diagram in social studies. Well, then you can also have them use it in math, and then also have them use it between languages so that the graphic organizer becomes something that is very familiar to them, that then becomes a bridge for transferring. Another way to help transfer is to use cognates. Did you know that English shares a lot of cognates with languages such as Portuguese, Spanish, French, Italian, even Romanian, Greek, Latin, and German? So, for example, the word révolution in French is revolution in English, or revolución in Spanish is the same as revolution in English. Activité, activity. Ángulo, angle. More than 20,000 cognates from different languages are shared with English. So go ahead and capitalize on that. So here's another exercise in using cognates. Read through this paragraph. It's the first paragraph of that video lesson on the water cycle. But this time it's in Spanish. Now that you know the lesson topic, which is the water cycle, you can pick out the cognates that are shared between English and Spanish. See if you can do that. So chances are that if your students already know about the topic of the water cycle, okay, then we might be able to pick out cycle, ciclo, solid, sólido, liquid, gas. And then all that are needed, oh, and vapor. Then all that are needed are the new keywords, which could be just two: hielo, ice, and water, agua. And the concept should be able to transfer pretty efficiently between the first language and the second. Pictures or other ways of contextualizing the message then serve to expand and confirm your students' predictions. If you're wondering about this picture up here, I like to think of these as synapses, and what goes on in your brain when you're making connections between new words and new languages. Um, and another way to do that is by building background. You can do that by linking to past learning, so you can ask your students things like, remember that yesterday we learned about democracy? Well, today we're going to learn and focus on another part of democracy, which is about, and then you could go on. So that is one way that you can help them link to past learning. You can also help them build knowledge if they don't already have knowledge built about a certain concept. You can do so through video clips, experiments, read aloud, field trips. And another way to help build background is to help them look for patterns. Patterns in words in the new language, in sentences, and in paragraphs. So let's apply the idea of looking for patterns to unlock the meaning, because our brains are fabulous pattern detectors, especially when they're based in meaningful communication. Years ago, I worked with indigenous women in the highlands of Bolivia. I wanted to learn about their understandings of mathematical concepts. But first I needed to learn the number names in their language. So this grid shows some of the numbers in their counting system. As you can see, the number is written in the far left column. The word is spelled out in the middle column, and the meaning is written down in the right column. So the number 1 is Maya, and Dunga is the word for the number 10. Maya, Dunga. If you know that Maya is 1 and Dunga is 10, then the number 11 is Dunga Mayani. Pretty logical, don't you think? Okay, so let's go back to number 3, Kimsa. So if you know that, then the number 13 is Dunga for 10 and Kimsani for 13. Alternatively, the number for 20 is Ba Dunga. Again, Ba from 2, okay, and then Dunga for 10. So, using the same logic, you can derive Kimsat Dunga for 30. So now, knowing this pattern, you can figure out how to say 31. See if you can try that. If you guessed Kimsat Dunga Mayani, you'd be right. Last question. What about 33? Here's the answer. Kimsat Dunga Kimsani. Great. You just learned to count in Aymara, a language that has been spoken since the 1st century after Christ, in what is known as the cradle of the American name. So to close this part of the presentation, remember to teach for transfer between both icebergs, if you will. You can also do this by allowing for clarifications in the first language, but then insisting on transferring to the second language. Publicly praise when your students speak the second language. And pull, don't push production. Don't give rewards instead of punishments. Rewards for speaking the second language instead of punishments for speaking the first language. As we begin our second part of teaching for comprehensibility, which is the second part of the presentation, I'm going to ask you, I'm going to give you a survey. Okay? What do you do to make yourself more easily understood? Go ahead and pick one of these, and then we'll go ahead and see how everybody answers.